I've always felt like an afterthought in my family. It wasn't always obvious, but looking back, the signs were there from the beginning. My younger sister Sarah arrived like a burst of sunshine. Golden curls, dimples, and a smile that instantly captured everyone's hearts. From day one, she had our parents completely enchanted. As for me, I was the quiet one, more engrossed in my chemistry set than in making friends. I still remember my 10th birthday vividly. I had been dropping hints for weeks, hoping for a new microscope, but instead, I got a frilly dress that made me look like a cupcake. "But Mom, I hate dresses," I protested. "Nonsense, you'll look just like Sarah," she replied, missing the point entirely. As we grew older, the gap between us only widened. Sarah sailed through school on her charm and good looks, while I buried myself in books and science experiments. "Did you hear? Sarah's been nominated for prom queen," Mom gushed at dinner one night. "That's great," I mumbled, trying to sound enthusiastic. I'll won first place in the science fair today." "Oh, that's nice, dear," Dad said absently, already turning back to Sarah. "So, Princess, have you picked out your dress yet?" Year after year, no matter how significant my achievements were, they always seemed to be overshadowed by Sarah's latest triumph. My senior year's state science fair was my moment to shine. After months of perfecting my project on sustainable biofuels, they announced the winners. "First place goes to Carla Johnson," I heard, and my heart soared. Finally, something even my parents couldn't ignore. Or so I thought. "That's great, honey," Mom said distractedly when I told her the news, "but we can't make it to the awards ceremony. Sarah has a dance recital that day, and you know how important that is to her." I watched them fuss over Sarah's costume and makeup while my trophy gathered dust on a shelf. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but one I was becoming accustomed to. When acceptance letters started rolling in, I could barely contain my excitement. A full scholarship to a prestigious university. It was more than I'd ever dared hope for. "Mom, Dad, I got in." I burst into the living room, waving the letter. "Full ride and everything." Mom glanced up from her magazine. "That's nice, dear. Sarah, didn't you say you needed help picking out a prom dress?" Just like that, my big moment was brushed aside again. "But it's a full scholarship." I tried again, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad patted my shoulder absently. "Good job, kiddo. Sarah, Princess, let's go shopping. Can't have you showing up to prom in just anything." I watched them drive away, my acceptance letter crumpled in my hand. It was a familiar feeling, but it still stung. Despite the lack of fanfare from my family, I packed my bags and headed off to college, filled with hope. For the first time, I was free from Sarah's shadow, free to be just Carla. College was a revelation. My passion for science was respected and even admired. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Meanwhile, Sarah followed the path our parents had always dreamed of. She enrolled in the local community college, more interested in parties than classes. "College is so hard," she whined during one of our rare phone calls. "I don't know how you do it, Carla." I fought the urge to point out that maybe if she spent less time partying and more time studying, she might find it easier. Instead, I offered some vague encouragement and changed the subject. It was during my sophomore year that Sarah dropped her bombshell. "I'm engaged," she squealed over the phone. "Mike proposed last night. Isn't it romantic?" Mike, her high school sweetheart, the guy who'd once asked me if science was like really hard and stuff. "That's great, Sarah." I managed trying to sound enthusiastic. "Have you set a date? We're thinking right after graduation," she gushed. "Oh, Carla, it's going to be perfect. You'll be my maid of honor, won't you?" The wedding was exactly as expected. Sarah was radiant, Mike looked uncomfortable in his tux, and I stood there in my frilly pink nightmare, forcing a smile for the photos. "Isn't this perfect?" Mom whispered to me during the reception. This is what every mother dreams of for her daughter. I wanted to ask if she'd ever dreamed anything for me, but I held my tongue. It was Sarah's day, after all. As I threw myself into my studies and later my career, Sarah's life seemed to follow a script straight out of our parents' dreams. Within a year of her wedding, she announced her first pregnancy. "I'm going to be a grandmother," Mom squealed over the phone. "Oh, Carla, isn't it wonderful?" I murmured my congratulations, trying to ignore the implicit question in her voice. "When are you going to settle down, Carla? When will you give us grandchildren?" Emma arrived 9 months later, a bundle of pink blankets and loud cries. I flew home for the weekend, dutifully cooing over my new niece and enduring the not-so-subtle hints from my parents. "You know, Carla," Dad said, bouncing Emma on his knee, "you're not getting any younger." Don't you want this for yourself? I gritted my teeth. I'm focused on my career right now, Dad. Mom clucked her tongue. Career is all well and good, dear, but family is what really matters. I bit back a retort about how they'd never seemed to care much about my career before. Instead, I plastered on a smile and changed the subject. 2 years later, Liam joined the family. Once again, I played the role of the doting aunt, all while fielding questions about my own lack of family. Meanwhile, I was making strides in my career as a biotechnologist. Long hours and hard work paid off, and by the time I was 30, I had become a senior researcher. My parents' response to this news was a distracted "that's nice, dear," as they cooed over new pictures of Emma and Liam. Around this time, I decided to buy a house. I'd saved carefully, living frugally while my colleagues splurged on expensive cars and vacations. When I finally found the perfect place, a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood, I was over the moon. "Mom, Dad, I bought a house," I announced during our next phone call. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A house," Mom repeated. "All by yourself?" "Yes, all by myself," I said, my excitement deflating a little. "It's a great investment, but it's such a big house for one person," Mom interrupted. "What will you do with all that space?" I sighed. "I'll enjoy it, Mom. It's mine." "Well," she said, her tone making it clear she didn't approve, "I suppose if that's what you want." "Oh, did I tell you? Emma lost her first tooth yesterday." Just like that, we were back to talking about Sarah and her kids. The months following my house purchase were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new home. I threw myself into decorating, turning each room into a reflection of my personality. It was during this time that I started to feel a shift in my family dynamics. The usual calls from my parents became less frequent, and when they did call, there was an odd tension in their voices. One evening, I received a call from my mother. "Carla, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "we're having a family dinner next week. You'll be there, won't you? We need to talk." I agreed, my suspicions raised. In my family, "we need to talk" usually meant trouble was brewing. The night of the dinner arrived, and I pulled up to my parents' house with a sense of foreboding. Sarah's car was already in the driveway, and I could hear the excited shrieks of Emma and Liam from inside. Dinner was a tense affair. My parents kept exchanging glances, and Sarah seemed unusually quiet. Mike, Sarah's husband, kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Finally, as we were finishing dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Carla, we need to talk about something important." "Here it comes." I looked at my dad, trying to gauge where this was going. He glanced at my mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, you see, sweetie," he began, "we've been thinking that big house of yours. It's really too much for just one person." I felt my hackles rise. "Dad, we've been over this. I like my house. It's mine." "Yes, but," he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. My mother jumped in. "What your father is trying to say is that Sarah and her family need more space. The kids are growing, and their apartment is getting cramped." I looked at Sarah, who suddenly found her plate intensely interesting. "Okay, and?" I prompted. And the mother continued, her voice sickly sweet, "We think that since you're single and have no children, you should give your house to Sarah and her family. Just give them the keys and move out." For a moment, I was speechless. I looked around the table, half expecting someone to yell "gotcha," and reveal that it was all a joke. But all I saw were expectant faces. "You can't be serious," I finally managed. "Now, Carla," my mother said, her tone patronizing, "don't be selfish. Sarah needs more space for her family more than you need it." "Selfish," I repeated, my voice rising. "How is it selfish to want to keep the house I worked hard for and paid for myself?" "It's your sisterly duty to help in times of need," my father chimed in. I turned to Sarah, who was still avoiding my gaze. "And what do you have to say about this?" She shrugged, finally meeting my eyes. "Well, it would be nice to have more space for the kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own family was asking me to give up my home and acting like I was the unreasonable one for refusing. "No," I said firmly, stating up. "Absolutely not. I'm not giving up my house." I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. "Hools." I heard my father call out, "Think about it, Carla. Family should come first." The days after that disastrous family dinner felt like a blur of disbelief and anger. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, struggling to comprehend my family's audacity. How could they even think of asking me to give up my home? My phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah, but I ignored them all. On the third day, as I was trying to focus on work, my phone lit up with a call from an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was just another telemarketer or a wrong number, I'd answered with a wary, "Hello? Is this Carla?" A disapproving woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" I replied, trying to stay calm. "This is your Aunt Mildred. I can't believe what I'm hearing about you, young lady. Your poor sister needs a home for her children, and you're living all alone in that big house. Shame on you." I felt my blood pressure rising. "Aunt Mildred, that's not." "In my day," she interrupted, "family helped family. We didn't hoard our resources like misers." "I'm not hoarding anything," I snapped. "It's my house. I bought it with my own money." "Well," she huffed, "if you're not going to use all that space, you should at least consider donating your eggs. It's not like you're using them anyway." I was so shocked I nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me." "You heard me," she said primly. "You're not getting any younger, you know. Tick-tock." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking with anger. How dare she? How dare any of them? But it didn't end there. Over the next few days, I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Each one had an opinion on what I should do with my house and my life. My great-aunt Edna left a voicemail. "Carla dear, it's your great-aunt Edna. I just wanted to say it's not too late to find a nice man and settle down. Then you'd need that big house." It was relentless. Every ping of my phone brought a new judgment, a new guilt trip. I felt like I was going crazy. I started dreading each notification, wincing whenever my phone buzzed. I threw myself into work, staying late at the lab just to avoid returning home to more messages. One late night at work, I caught a cold. Nothing serious, just a bad case of sniffles, but enough that my boss insisted I take a few days off to recover. So there I was, curled up on my couch with a box of tissues, feeling miserable both physically and emotionally. My phone had been mercifully quiet for a few hours, and I was just starting to relax when I heard it, a noise at my front door like someone was fumbling with the lock. My heart raced. Was someone trying to break in? I got up as quietly as I could, creeping toward the door. Through the window, I could see familiar figures on my porch. I yanked the door open, startling the people on the other side. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded. Caught red-handed were my parents and Sarah, looking like deer caught in headlights, frozen in the act of trying to break into my home. My mother was the first to recover. "Carla, dear, we were just worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. So you decided to break into my house?" I shot back. I couldn't mask my incredulity as I faced my family. My father at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "We didn't think you'd be home. We thought you'd be at work," he mumbled. "And that makes it okay," I practically shouted. "What were you planning to do? Move Sarah in while I was gone?" Sarah, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Carla, you're being hysterical. We were just going to wait for you to come home." It was then I noticed the car parked behind them, loaded with boxes and furniture. My blood ran cold as I realized the full extent of their plan. "You were going to move in?" I asked, my voice flat. "You were actually going to move into my house without my permission?" "Now, Carla," my mother began, adopting that patronizing tone I knew all too well. "We've discussed this. Sarah needs the space more than you do. We thought if we just took the initiative." "You thought wrong." I cut her off. "This is my house. Mine. I bought it with my own money I earned through hard work. You have no right to it." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My neighbors, the Johnsons, were peering out their window, clearly concerned by the commotion. Mr. Johnson caught my eye and held up his phone, indicating he was calling the police. I nodded, grateful for their support. Turning back to my family, I said, "I've called the police. You need to leave, now." "You wouldn't," my father scoffed. "Your own family." As if on cue, the sound of sirens filled the air. My family's faces paled as a police car pulled up and 2 officers stepped out. "Is there a problem here?" one officer asked, eyeing the scene warily. "Yes, officer," I said, taking a deep breath. "These people were attempting to break into my home." "Carla," my mother gasped. "How could you?" The officers turned their attention to my family. "Is this true?" one asked. My father began to stammer out an explanation, but the officer raised a hand. "Sir, attempting to enter a property without the owner's permission is a serious offense. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." As the officers escorted my family away, I stood in the doorway, trembling. I couldn't believe it had come to this. "You'll regret this, Carla," Sarah called over her shoulder as they were led away. "You'll end up old and alone." I slammed the door shut and slid down to the floor, my back resting against it. Tears streamed down my face, a turbulent mix of anger, hurt, and relief. The phone had finally gone silent. No more calls from distant relatives. No more guilt-tripping messages. It felt like I'd been excommunicated from the family. Part of me was relieved, but another part ached for the connection, however dysfunctional it had been. In the midst of this emotional storm, I received an unexpected message from Aunt Maggie, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since a falling out over some old family drama. Her message was simple: "I'll meet you tomorrow at Café Blue at 4:00 p.m. Intrigued and desperate for any alley, I agreed to meet her. The next day, I found myself in a cozy corner of Café Blue, sitting across from Aunt Maggie. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "Carla," she began, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through. Your mother called me, trying to get me on her side, but there's more to this story than you know. That's why I asked you to meet me." My curiosity was piqued. I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Aunt Maggie took a deep breath. "Your parents and Sarah are in serious financial trouble. Sarah and Mike have been living beyond their means for years, luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish vacations, all on credit." I shook my head in disbelief. "But why? How could they do that?" "It's worse than that," Aunt Maggie continued. "Mike has a gambling problem, a bad one. He's been secretly draining their accounts for years." The pieces started falling into place, the desperate attempt to get my house, the constant pressure. "But what about Mom and Dad?" I asked. Aunt Maggie's face grew grim. "They lost a significant amount of money in a pyramid scheme a few years back. They've been barely keeping their heads above water. They were planning to move in with Sarah and Mike as soon as they got your house." I sat back, stunned. "How do you know all this?" "I work at the bank where they all have accounts," Aunt Maggie explained. "I noticed some suspicious activity and started digging. When I confronted your mother about it, she cut me out of the family." My mind reeled. While I had been working hard and saving, my family had been digging themselves into a hole and trying to drag me down with them. "Carla," Aunt Maggie said gently, "I know this is a lot to take in, but I think it's time we did something about this situation. If you're willing, I have an idea." Armed with the information Aunt Maggie had shared, we decided to dig deeper. We hired a no-nonsense private investigator named Diana, who came highly recommended. For weeks, we waited anxiously as Diana worked her magic. Finally, she called us in for a meeting. What she revealed left us speechless. Mike, Sarah's husband, had been leading a double life. He was involved in an affair with none other than my cousin Jenny, Uncle Bob's daughter. He'd been funneling money to her for months. Diana showed us bank statements, hotel receipts, expensive gifts, weekend getaways, you name it. "But where did he get the money?" I asked, dreading the answer. Diana's face grew grim. "From his gambling wins and from your parents." Aunt Maggie and I exchanged shocked glances. The betrayal ran deeper than we'd imagined. We decided to host a family gathering at my house. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very house they had tried to take from me would now be the stage for their undoing. The day of the gathering arrived. I watched as my family trickled into the room, their faces a mix of curiosity and smugness. They likely thought I would cave to their demands. Once everyone was seated, I stood up, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. "I've called you all here today because there are some things you need to know," I began. I laid out everything, the financial troubles, the gambling, the affair. With each revelation, I saw the color drain from their faces. Sarah was the first to react. She jumped up, tears streaming down her face. "It's not true," she screamed, before collapsing into sobs. "Mike, tell them it's not true." But Mike was already halfway to the door. Uncle Bob, his face twisted with rage, grabbed him by the collar. "You son of a," he growled. "That's my daughter you've been fooling around with." My parents sat in stunned silence. The realization of their exposed financial ruin seemed to hit them harder than the fact that they had tried to take my house. The relatives who had judged me so harshly began stammering apologies. "We had no idea," Aunt Mildred muttered. "Carla, we're so sorry." As the chaos unfolded around me, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth was out. The lies and manipulations were exposed. In the weeks that followed, our family was turned upside down. Unable to forgive Mike's infidelity, Sarah filed for divorce. With nowhere else to go, she and the kids moved back in with our parents. Their reprieve was short-lived. The bank foreclosed on their house, forcing them into a cramped rented apartment where all 5 of them were squeezed into a space smaller than my living room. I watched it all unfold from a distance. After much soul-searching and several tearful nights, I made the difficult decision to sever all ties with my immediate family. "You're doing the right thing, Carla," Aunt Maddie assured me one afternoon over coffee. "It's not easy, but it's necessary for your mental health and well-being." Aunt Maddie had become my rock, the family I chose when my blood relatives had let me down. Our weekly coffee dates became a cornerstone of my new life. As the weeks turned into months, I settled into a new routine without the constant drama and demands of my family. Yet with that newfound peace came a startling realization. I was lonely. "You know," Aunt Maddie said one day, "there's a world out there beyond work and home. Why don't you try something new?" Encouraged by her, I decided to join a local rock climbing group. It was far outside my comfort zone, but as I strapped on the harness for the first time, I felt a thrill of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. That's where I met Alex. He was belaying another climber, his strong hands confidently handling the rope. When he turned and flashed me a warm smile, my heart skipped a beat. "First time?" he asked, noticing my nervous fidgeting with the equipment. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed. We struck up a conversation, and I was immediately drawn to his kind eyes and easygoing nature. As we talked, I learned he was a wildlife photographer with a passion for capturing the beauty of nature. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement about the possibility of a relationship. Alex was kind, adventurous, and understood the complexities of family dynamics in a way few others could. We began dating, our shared love for nature and understanding of complex family dynamics bringing us closer. Before I knew it, we were discussing marriage, a concept that once seemed foreign and unattainable to me. Through it all, Aunt Maddie remained my steadfast support. She became the mother figure I had always yearned for but never had. "Carla," she said to me one day, her eyes misty, "I want you to know something. I've changed my will. I'm leaving everything to you." As I hugged her, tears streaming down my face, I marveled at how much my life had changed. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led me to where I was meant to be. With Aunt Maddie's love, Alex's support, and my newfound strength, I was ready to embrace whatever the future held.